Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Christian.
I'm Tommy. And Christian, I need to know. We're going to play a would you rather or what, either or scenario. For the rest of your life, you are going to train 3 times a week. And I need you to select one of two individuals who will coach and program those 3 training days every week for the rest of your life. Are you
Ooh,
picking Dr. Joel Seedman or Real Game Athletics?
I can only work out 3 times a week for the rest of my life. That's got to be Dr. Seedman or Real Game Athletics for the rest of
Yeah,
my
who you
life.
go? Who you going with?
That's
I'm
tough,
really
man.
excited to hear this answer.
I
And
mean,
I
I might be a
purposely picked those
coordinator.
two because they're on like wildly different ends of the spectrum from each other in terms of eh,
They are polar
almost everything.
opposites for sure.
Yeah,
They are polar opposites of the training spectrum. They're going like, okay, one, I'm going to be super, lots of coordination drills, maybe lots of interesting jumping stuff, very dynamic, a little bit different, unique, maybe kind of be fun to do. The other, I'm
wacky
stuck with
range of
motor
motion.
squats for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
Oh, but you know me with my weightlifting background, I do like to lift heavy, and I know which one I would get to at least get some max strength work in, despite the lack of range of motion on my max strength. I will feel incredibly strong because I can just load up eight
you just
plates
go
on the bar.
after it.
I'm not going very far. I
Is
might
that a
I might
final
have to
answer,
go
or are
with
you still?
I might
Are
have to
you,
go. I'm working through it here. I gotta talk it out to understand what's going on.
yeah, no, no. This is what I was hoping for. It wasn't when I thought about this question. I was like, I probably went back and forth with my own thoughts 30 times.
Yeah, I mean, just out of an enjoyment standpoint of the stuff I like to do, I much prefer doing heavier lifting stuff. I enjoy sprinting. I know I'd get that on one end. I don't know if I'd get that on the other end. At least one end is okay. I can lift heavy, do some jumps, do some sprints. The other stuff, I feel like I'm just gonna shrivel up and be weak as piss.
I mean, for the record, too, I don't know either of these individuals, and I don't know exactly if everything they show on social media is exactly how they train people. But I mean, all we have to go with is the stuff that has been publicly put out on
No, I think that's what we
social
have to
media.
go with is what's on social media. That's the assumption we're making is what you see on Instagram is the training modalities we're going with.
Yes, because like I said, in the background, they may be doing other things that aren't as flashy, maybe more traditional, sound, kind of tried and proven strength training methods. But I figured that was the juxtaposition of their kind of yeah what's out there.
Just satisfying the algorithms, Tommy.
Hey, play the game, right? Play the game.
No, I think my final answer would have to be with the doctor, the mad
Going with the
scientist,
doctor.
Joel Seaman. Yeah.
Now, if you sprint, do you have to warm up or no?
No, absolutely not. Come on now.
Okay.
We're going with what's done on social media.
Yeah.
What is that saying? A tiger doesn't warm up before it
Yeah, it hunts its prey or
chases its
whatever.
prey or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's the modality we're going with here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was curious to see kind of which one you would go with.
I'm going purely out of what I would enjoy to do more.
And it's just a quarter squat
That
then.
is the one I would for sure and have more fun doing.
Yeah, I'd be worried about like locking up with the range of motion, just being like
Mhm.
locked in 90/90 for everything I do for the rest of my life. But I also don't know how long I could keep up some of the wacky, wild range of motion and twisting and reaching and like at some point I don't think I'd be able to do that.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
When
Like
I'm just going of like which one misses more, and from what you see online, like which one is checking more boxes in terms of well-rounded development, I definitely think
yeah,
it's Joel. I
yeah,
feel like he just checks more boxes despite everything else that's going on. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get some speed work in, gonna get some RFD dynamic work. There's gonna be lots of max strength work in there. I'm like, okay, I can live with that.
yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I was just curious what your your thought process would be, because I feel like sometimes too that those two accounts get like memeified to no end. That you know this was I don't want to say serious, but like a way to like actually like okay, if I had to do some of these things, what would I actually do, and what would my reasoning for this be? I don't think I've ever thought of that. I just see rugby strength coach or now call me Kier, you know, making fun of people. And I feel like that's the only thing that we kind of associate with some of those things. So I was just curious to get your perspective on it. But you've sold me. I think I'd have to agree with you on that one. And there may even be a way that I could, you know, convince. Well, none of this 90-90 stuff. I'll just do isometrics at like a 90. Like let me do some heavy iso holds or something like that. Which might be better than just locking into a really small range of motion. Like I don't know. You've convinced me though. I think you've made a good argument.
Now, could the track athlete and you sprint without warming up for 40 minutes, Tommy, first?
No, I mean I'm also old, so I need to like prepare for 30 or 35 minutes before I did anything, high velocity.
You're rushing.
So
Only 30 minutes?
I mean I can't be there all day, but I got to make sure I get at least a few decent things done before I, you know, start flying around, relatively speaking. Flying around for me, not flying around by, athletic people standards.
Yeah, actually fast or actually strong human beings takes much longer to warm up than us too.
Agreed. But no, you've convinced me. You've sold me on that. Sold me on that argument. I think those are sound reasons for selecting what you did. So I would
Oh
agree
yeah,
with you on that one.
yeah, selecting the better of two evils. Which one's going to keep me more better at doing things and
Uh,
less mediocrely athletic than I already am, and I think that's the one.
yeah, no, you sold me on it. Um, yeah, I was like I said, just curious to. I figured it wouldn't be like it's not the question that comes out and then you're like, oh yeah, this one or that one. Like you're like, oh, okay, let me take a moment here. Let me sit back and like look at everything across the board and then decide which one do I actually want to go with.
I'm gonna have to go through these feeds later today. I'm just gonna shoot you a text again later,
Yeah, I'd be like, I
confirming or
maybe
denying my
changed my mind.
answer.
Update on the next episode. Did we change our minds?
Probably won't though. I'm feeling pretty confident about this answer I've given.
No, I'm confident about that too. And like I said, you've sold me on it. And the other thing you might sell me on is maybe a new perspective on weightlifting.
I mean,
I
one
feel
thing
like
about
every time I
that,
talk to you, I learn something new about weightlifting, or I come at it with a new lens that I didn't have quite before. And so we've already talked about weightlifting on the show. We had a few part series way back. It was one of the original. I think it was 16 and 17 for the episode, something like that, like 2 or 3 years ago. And we had kind of weighed up the pros and cons of using weightlifting as a training tool. And weightlifting, let me clarify, I mean clean and jerk and snatch and any of its derivatives. So yes, if you were in the sport of weightlifting, I would hope you're doing those things because that is your sport and you would want to be prepared to do those things. But if you are an athlete in a different sport, you may be implementing weightlifting movements and derivatives as part of your training to develop physical qualities you need in your sport. And I think that's where it becomes, at least for me, a little more, do I do it or do I not do it? Obviously, in the sport of weightlifting, you have to do it. That's no question. So, but Christian, you've been involved in the sport itself, which is often why I've gone to you to ask questions about this or dive deeper into things because I think there's a different perspective you get when you coach weightlifting as a training tool versus as a like technical movement in a sport.
Yeah, it's definitely different, right? And I guess to provide context for those who still don't know me all that well, my background in weightlifting was as a strength and conditioning coach. I had an internship with my undergraduate degree, And with that, I went down to go coach and intern at a USAW training site down in the States in Florida for 6 months. So that is where I sort of really dove in to the weightlifting world. And then as every strength coach, you either get in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or weightlifting and powerlifting. That seems to be the trope right now. So that, and then I started being a recreational, barely mediocre competitive weightlifter for quite a few years there. So that's my background in the sport. And I've coached a few athletes, I've run quite a few competitions, and things like that. So that is my background in weightlifting. But yeah, absolutely, man. When you coach a strength sport, it gives you a different perspective, right? When we're coaching other sports, their sport practice is going to the court, going to the pitch, going to the track, from your standpoint. Whereas S&C and the sport are super tightly knit. So now your sport practice is blurred into the S&C practice, right? I still like to think of it as that way, is when I'm snatching and clean and jerking, I'm doing sport practice, right? As I've gotten more and more sort of involved in the sport, or maybe just gotten better at coaching the sport, that differentiation for me has gotten larger. When I'm coaching weightlifters, when we're snatching and clean and jerking, this is sport practice. And it's no longer we're gonna do 6x2 snatch with a pause at 75%. It's way more fluid than that for me now, as I'm using the derivatives and using different constraints as you would in a sport practice. If you saw your team or if you saw your person having these different deficiencies, I'm adjusting each practice as we're going through the week to help manage that a little bit. And then all the strength work, your squats, your pulls, pressing, bodybuilding work that you're doing in the end, that is the S&C piece. But when we're snatching and clean jerking, like it's sport practice time. And it's way more fluid and way more what you traditionally see in a sport practice from my philosophy than what you would see from doing Olympic weightlifting with an athlete.
Yeah, and like I said, that's why I always enjoy talking to you because I have a new appreciation now for running, jumping, changing direction, and stuff
Mhm.
like that. Having been involved now in track and field for so many years at this point, I mean, it feels like just yesterday I got involved in it, but now I'm sitting here going like, man, I've been full tracky for like nearly 7 years now or something like that. But you have this new appreciation for teaching the movement because exactly what you're talking about, blurring the line between sport and training, sprinting and jumping, and some of those movements for me now work in the same in the same way. When I'm at practice, I'm working with those athletes different than I would a soccer player, football player, rugby player who is now sprinting or changing direction as part of their training for their
Yeah.
sport. I look at those things a bit differently, and I think there is value in understanding the sport and why they do what they do with certain drills and training modalities, and then how can it be implemented in training for other sports. And I think weightlifting is no different. I can't just copy and paste what you do in a weightlifting practice, an actual sport of weightlifting session, and copy and paste that and give that to a basketball player or volleyball player as part of their training in the weight room.
Yeah.
Right, because the goals or the outcomes might be different, and there's a lot of things I learned from you. There's a lot of things I've learned from um, Danny Camargo's book is very good. There's a number of kinematic analyses of world championship, um, like weightlifting events that I have read. There is it Everett has a book.
Greg Everett's got a
Great,
book.
yeah, I've read
Yeah.
that book. So there's a number of things where once you start looking at the actual sport, you're like, oh, they they do A to do this, they do B to do that. I didn't realize that that was the reason they did those drills or that derivative of snatch or clean or something like that. And then it makes me take a step back and go, oh, is that what I want my athletes to do as a training tool? Because maybe I'm like missing the actual outcome of it. And those are a lot of the things I've learned from you, which is why I'm excited to kind of have this conversation today to like kind of further dive into when should we use weightlifting as a training tool? When should we not? What are some of the reasons? What are some of the reasons? Like dive into all of that because I think you're a wealth of knowledge for that type of stuff?
Yeah.
And I know the
When
answer
we've
from
had
you
this,
is probably going to be it depends, as always.
it's always it depends. And when we've had this conversation before of especially using kind of that Stu McMill and adage of you got to know the rules before you break them.
Yeah.
It's the same idea, right? It's understanding, okay, this is what at its purest form Olympic weightlifting looks like and needs to satisfy to be successful in it. Which of those boxes do I need to check? And am I comfortable checking? And which of those boxes am I comfortable just not worrying about, right? My athletes who are, again, now being track and field guy versus weightlifting guy, I use some weightlifting with my athletes and some derivatives of it, but I am very confident, comfortable of knowing I don't need to see X, Y, and Z. I've got a very intentful purpose around what I want to see with it or what I'm using certain derivatives for. And I can adjust that and make it a little bit weird or make it a little bit different depending on what I'm trying to achieve with those athletes. And that's what people forget is like, okay, we're gonna do weightlifting. We need as good as weightlifting as possible. We need to make sure everything looks perfect. Like, oh, they can do some stuff and kind of be shit at it. I'm okay with that. As long as I'm achieving the goals of weightlifting, it's not violating anything outrageous or it's not going to hurt them at all. I'm okay with it not looking perfect, right? I'd say throwers are probably your best example of weightlifting not looking like weightlifting. But for them, that's not the purpose of it, right? And if you look at the nature of the sport, it also fits a little bit more closely with that as well. So I understand where it's people go like, oh, like throwers do some crazy weightlifting things that are not traditional, but it also is satisfying different goals for them, right? They've got a pretty good understanding of where they're okay with weightlifting not being weightlifting and where they're okay with it being weightlifting, right? It's a means to an end for them. And same for it. And there's a lot of qualities that people just don't talk about with weightlifting. And again, it's always this conversation of, oh, are you a weightlifting guy or you're not a weightlifting guy? Usually the people, and this is the trend I tend to see, is that usually the people who aren't weightlifting guys, who go, oh, you shouldn't use Olympic weightlifting with athletes, tend not to be good at teaching it as well.
I was there
That's
at one point too.
yeah, and
Like
that,
I'd
and
say
you know, and
initially
that's
when I was completely anti weightlifting, I didn't have the understanding I did. And then when I got to like meeting you and Cook and getting to the U of A, I kind of went from never weightlifting people. And also some of that came from initially at Waterloo. Like I didn't even, we were training in open space,
yeah,
kettlebells and sleds. We didn't even have, so if I wanted to weightlift the teams I was working with, it wasn't even an option from a training tool
mm-hmm.
standpoint. So it was a combination of that and not knowing weightlifting well enough to never using it to now fast forward to the U of A where I wanted to learn about it. And I was using it with everybody, whether we probably needed to or not, because it was good for me to go through seeing it, coaching it, whatever. And I feel like now I've come back to the middle a little bit where I'm more confident in the skill set I have to coach it if I need to coach it, but I can also withdraw from it and go, I don't think this scenario makes sense. I'm not going to use weightlifting in this particular case.
Yeah, and it's being able to select who you're going to want to use it with, right, and being able to recognize it of, you know what, it's probably not the tool for you. And there is a piece as well. I remember when I was working with my curling team, I weightlifted with a couple of the athletes. One of the men's team loved weightlifting, and they're like, hey, can we weightlift? Can we do cleans? Versus doing trap bar jumps, whatever other kind of your classical call it speed power movement would be. And they're like, yeah, we want to do weightlifting. I'm like, sure, absolutely. And there's a benefit of doing Olympic weightlifting. Like it's a very complex skill. There's a lot of layers
Absolutely.
to it and learning it. And I am very strongly a believer of there's benefit in just learning skills, being good at skills. People who are good at learning stuff learn stuff better, generally speaking. So if you're, and then that's what we talk about. Who are really good, athletes. They generally pick up a very diverse set of skills very quickly. They're very adaptable. They can do lots of different stuff, right? So for the idea of developing more athletic athletes, teaching them skills and improving their ability to learn skills is incredibly valuable. It's something that for people forget about weightlifting. Everyone looks at it from the perspective of, oh, it's power, it's a rate of force development. And if that's the level we're looking at this, if that's the level we're going down of it's, oh, weightlifting improves power and rate of force development, like we've missed the boat. So if it's just power and rate of force development, that's all it is. Just do trap bar jumps. Just do throws.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that surface level of analysis beyond power and rate of force development.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, in the previous series we did, we went through all kinds of pluses and minuses, and I'll kind of go back to the point that you just made about being a complex skill. And you know, one of the arguments against, and I had mentioned this, is, oh, it takes too long to teach. It's too complicated. It's too whatever. And yes, it's complicated. It is difficult to teach, and it's requires a lot of movements. But when you break down and look at the actual movements required from the athlete in order to competently perform clean, snatch, whatever, I would say probably 9 out of 10 of those exercises you're teaching them to do anyway.
Yeah.
The only one that I think I'd mention was the overhead squat. You may not teach somebody otherwise to overhead squat unless you had the intention to have them perform snatch, but you're probably teaching them to squat and hinge and lunge and press overhead and RDL and all of these other things. So whether or not you actually get into weightlifting, I'd say you're probably doing a lot of the groundwork anyway with your athletes through the basic movements that you're likely programming anyway. So to then challenge them a little bit with that coordination is, I think, probably a good challenge for them, especially with athletes that maybe don't have a lot of variety in the skill that they do.
Yeah.
And especially now at the different contexts. So like where I'm at right now with the track team I'm working with, I use it a little bit with the speed power athletes. I use it mostly because I don't think I could remove it without having a mutiny on my hands. Like if
Yeah.
we're being honest, we're fortunate enough to have those Kaiser squats.
Hmm.
So when we have weightlifting in there because it's about triple extension, power, like you mentioned, rate of force development, whatever, man, slap people on the Kaiser. They do 2 reps. They figured out how to use it. And now they can just blast on that thing
Yeah.
and get ridiculous power outputs. But there's limited coordination to that, right? Compare
Oh
that
yeah.
to the distance and the endurance athletes I work with. We went through the methodical, okay, we're going to do some trap bar jumps to develop explosive power and abilities that you probably don't use much in your training in your sport. We're going to teach you to squat. We're going to teach you to hinge. We're going to teach you to lunge. We spent several months doing all of that. And then I finally put cleans in and we're still doing them. But like you said, I view that as a kind of a catch-all. We're moving in a different way, coordinating, timing in a way that you would never do in just continuous running and endurance training. And then I can pair other things. I stick them on the Kaiser sometimes, or pair a squat with a jump, or something like that to give them a little bit of pop in a exercise which doesn't require the complexity. But for those athletes, for example, I do like using the cleans, and I have used that is where I think in some of the other event areas you get like the multis, they do such a variety of different events that in fact I probably want to keep their training simpler in the weight room because they deal with so much complexity in their sport, or even other events where like the hurdles, for example, it's still linear but you deal with a lot of rotational control, vertical change of direction, going up and down over the hurdle, or you should go just over top of the hurdle. You don't want to go too up and down, but you have a much more vertical change of direction compared to you know some of the other sports in there. So that's something that's kind of changed for me since I did the first iteration of this episode in the series, is that yeah, I'm viewing it a little bit more as a coordination
Yeah.
challenge and throwing in something like a split snatch, where now can you coordinate
Yeah.
splitting the limbs as you throw the bar overhead, things like that, as opposed to a true power rate of force development movement, as you alluded to.
Yeah. Well, and there's lots of components to it in terms of, and you've touched on a few of them with rhythm and coordination. And as I've gotten better at weightlifting, understand weightlifting more, like it is mostly about timing, rhythm, and coordination. That is most of the movement there. It's not just go. You've got to time the sequencing of movements the right places, right? If you come back too soon, everything's gonna get messed up below. You got to shift the body joint angles in the right way to get to the right positions to then express force into the barbell to get overhead. It's a lot of things that people forget about. Again, it's not just going, it's not just effort, it's effort with intent and effort with coordination and sequencing that you see in most sport, right? An
Yeah.
acceleration isn't just going out of the
Oh, it's a
blocks. You don't just go.
exactly.
You drop the shin, you drive through. You've got to be patient before you put the other one down. If your frequency is way too high and you're not patient, your acceleration is going to be messed up.
Yeah. And if you're
Similarly,
way
if
too
you're
patient, you're
too,
too slow.
yeah,
You have to find the balance. Like you said, man, I can't tell you how many times I think I've used the phrase feet hit, bar hit.
yeah,
Because like you said, someone just rips the bar and it's up here and their feet hit the ground and they're already stable and then the bar comes crashing down
yeah.
on them. And like you said, and that's a timing or coordinative error that that person is making.
Well, and then there's these sort of, you can call them tertiary benefits or tertiary adaptations of impact and deceleration and all these other little components of when you catch a clean. You've got the deceleration of the lower limb when you land and having to stop the bar. There's a component of having the bar hit your shoulders. And I remember this is a conversation I had with a coach of, we were talking about ACL rehab and rugby players. And the coach is like, well, yeah, I will hit them with stuff in seated positions and not like hit them, like smacking them up with the head, but taking pads and bumping them in the body and bumping them in the shoulders. And him and I had this conversation. He's just like, we forget to train the qualities of impact when rehabbing people because that's an inherent nature of the sport is they have to be able to take an impact, whether it's brace, readjust, or just tolerate general impact of contact.
Yeah, an
That is a quality
external
that's inherent.
force acting on you in an
Yeah.
unpredictable way.
And it's something you don't say of like, oh yeah, we got to train impact strength or whatever you want to call it. But it's an important quality to keep in mind of athletes, depending on the sport they're in, need to be able to tolerate impact. And that is a benefit from snatching and cleaning is if you take lots of impact with extended out arms or take a lot of impact into the shoulder, Olympic lifting can be a great tool to help develop that alongside all the other qualities that you would traditionally think of with weightlifting. And that's the thing with weightlifting that I really enjoy, especially in a lot of different team sport, collision sport athletes, is I can check so many development boxes with one movement. So I can now come in to the weight room and do one lift and get half the things I want to get done with them completed. Then I can only do 3 movements in a workout, 4 movements in a workout, and not do this laundry list of 12 different things because I got 12 different goals to achieve. I can achieve 6 of those 12 goals with one movement. That gives them more time, more energy. They have to focus on learning less stuff in that session, and they have more energy for their sport practice, which is really what matters at the end of the day.
I'm a big fan of being a minimalist too. So
Yeah.
the less stuff you have to throw in there, the less exercises you have thrown around. Like I think that's always a good thing to have. Um, it's interesting you brought up kind of the catch-all, and I think that's what makes it such a good tool to use. I think maybe at the beginning, and then it's kind of this like catch-all. It almost kind of prepares you for the rest of the session, right? If then I come into something a little more powerful, I come into something with that requires a little more force output, whatever. Probably already hit some of those positions. I've loaded it a little bit. I've moved with some quickness, intent, things like that. That it actually sets the stage for maybe some of the more specifically focused exercises later on that that's just a thought that came to me now as you were talking about that stuff, and I'm like, oh, but kind of makes sense then if you have like two or three key things you want to do, maybe do some weightlifting before and then get into that stuff. Like you said, you need to have the intent of the weightlifting having that purpose. It's not just load up the bar as heavy as you can and go after it. And if you fail, okay, well, whatever. Just drop the weight a little bit and move as many reps as heavy as you can.
Well, and that's the piece too when you're using different derivatives. Is coaching intent is a huge one with that. And I love like the contrast sets or the complex sets with Olympic weightlifting. That's something I stole from Hawken Anderson was he was talking in one of his podcasts of I'll jump and throw before and then I'll heavy lift and I'll jump and throw after. And something I've adopted a little bit is I'll partner Olympic lifting stuff with med ball throws or plyo work or different contrast sets. And I've really quite enjoyed that of again connecting dots between the lift and something a little bit more similar to the sport, like you said, a little bit more specific work.
Have you found success with that? I have contemplated maybe using some of that stuff. We've been doing a lot of what I'd call kind of bastardized French contrast. It's
Okay.
not true French contrast because that is the four exercises which you then, move through various loads. But something we kind of borrowed from some of the American coaches that were working with Team China, where the complex is some sort of heavy movement, unloaded, very fast movement, and then like a moderately loaded
Hmm.
movement. So, for example, we might do something like a heavy squat, a hurdle hop, and then we get on the Kaiser and blast with like a moderate load. But we've talked about or thrown the idea around, does weightlifting potentially fit in somewhere in that trio, or like you said, pairing it with something. It's something I haven't done, but we've thought about it. So if you've actually done it, like, is what have you seen from it? How long have you tried it for? Like, I'd be kind of curious to hear the feedback you have if you've tried that.
Yeah, and for me contextually, the biggest piece is most of the track athletes I'm working with are 400 meters to 1500 meters.
Okay.
So they live in this world of speed endurance. They're incredibly fast twitch and incredibly explosive, but also have a very big aerobic speed endurance element behind what they're doing. And that's where I've started to kind of dabble into this world a little bit more of let's experiment with longer bounding drills and pogo hops and hurdle hops after something a little bit heavier.
Hmm.
I enjoy it for the 400-meter group, especially because they're going to come out of the blocks hard, which again, longer impulse movement, a little bit slower contraction times than you see at max velocity. So I like that because usually my weightlifting derivatives, in my intention, is we're going to try to improve some acceleration qualities. So
Yep.
I do a lot of stuff off blocks with them with weightlifting derivatives.
Okay.
And then I'm going to go do, okay, now we're going to do some med ball bounds, 40 meters, right? So there's a little bit of residual fatigue, but you got to keep that reactivity and that rhythm and that smooth bounce afterwards, right? And I like that contrast and that pairing with more of acceleration type movement off a block with then something very elastic and upright and rhythmical afterwards, and draw some connections now between the sport and what they're doing in the weight room, right? So I've enjoyed it. Again, has it been the game changer? Don't really know yet. Who's to say? Probably won't be. But
Yeah, but I think it's a good way to. We often talk about the line gets dropped at practice all the time. We're in a sport, and I think you'd agree with this now being in athletics. We're in a sport where it rewards people doing the basic things or simple things incredibly well. And so I do think there's like, yeah, you're probably not training your athletes much different than mine. And we're probably not training our athletes that different from other schools and other programs and other countries and whatever. Because at the end of the day, track and field or athletics, if there's any international listeners, just so there's no confusion, um, it's it's a simple sport.
yeah,
And you have to be creative in the sense of, are you coming up with a lot of different ways to do the same thing?
yeah,
And so to me, the idea of, like you said, using weightlifting and pairing it with something is just a different variety of, like you said, doing the one thing we need to do really well.
yeah.
And so that's why I'm curious where, like I said, I'm kind of 50-50 on weightlifting for the sport of athletics and track and field.
Mhm.
But using it in that context, I could be, I think, pulled more to the side of, okay, let me use it. And part of me is also thinking, like I said, I'd have a mutiny on my hands if I took
Yeah,
clean. I mean, especially clean. I think if I took snatch out, a lot of people would be like, "Oh, this scary lift where I throw the weight overhead is out of the program. I'm thrilled about this." But then for some people, I want that in there because of the shoulder action.
yeah,
And if I took cleans out of the program, I might as well just fire myself because no one's going to want me back. So if I'm going to like be putting that stuff in there because the athletes like it, and there's a tradition component of track and field athletes perform clean and snatch, maybe that's a different way I can use it rather than just at the start of the session, do your cleans, do your snatch, whatever it is that we have for that day, and then get into
yeah.
the rest of the lift. Can I introduce it into those complexes? That's a unique idea. And to me, I'm sitting there going like, okay, if I have to have weightlifting in there, it now becomes a tool for me to use with the variety of doing those simple things really well.
Yeah. when we get caught up in this, it's easy to get caught up in the, okay, you're gonna warm up, you're gonna do some dynamic jumps and throws, then you're gonna do your Olympic lift or your loaded jump, then you do your heavy strength, then you're gonna do accessory. Like it's very easy to get caught in that rhythm of like this is how it's gonna go this way, this way, this way. I have seen
Absolutely.
some interesting work where people are doing Olympic lifting stuff after, not after the session, but deeper into the session. There's a bit of system fatigue now. And you see
Yeah.
it with weightlifters where they're in a really big strength phase. They'll start the session with heavy squats. And then they'll do cleans or snatches with that existing leg fatigue from the heavy squats. Because they're looking at going, our goal is to improve leg strength
So
in
that's
this
got to go
phase.
first.
That's got to go first. But then they're going to do Olympic lifting with some leg fatigue. And from a perspective of, okay, learning a sports skill and creating novelty in the program, I actually find that very valuable. Because from a weightlifting perspective, if I'm going to do cleans after heavy squats, I don't have the liberty, and especially a movement like clean, where it's relatively simple in the weightlifting world. It's the easiest of the three movements for most.
Yeah.
If I'm going to have tired legs from squatting, I've got to catch it just right, especially depending on the athlete. Those who find clean super, super easy, it's not going to be an issue. But taller athletes like myself, where the clean for me is the hardest because of leg strength, if I've got fatigued legs going into cleans, I've got to
Makes it way
catch that
more
bar
challenging.
just right. I've got to time the bounce properly out of the hole. If I don't, I'm just going to have a terrible day. So there's a component of that can teach you how to do the movement better, because under fatigue you can't do it poorly because you're fresh. Like freshness does allow for you to just sort of throw things or muscle through things, whereas a little bit of fatigue actually helps you learn the movement a little bit better as well. So there's a component of that that I enjoy, and we've talked about this with the staff here, with our, especially our middle distance athletes, of potentially doing some weight room stuff after track workouts, or potentially doing weight room stuff that's a little bit more dynamic after some fatigue, because the inherent ability of their sport is they've got to come out really hot the first 200 meters. They got to hold on for anywhere from another 500 meters to a K. And then they
Yeah.
got to
Depending
kick
on what
again
happens.
in the last 200 meters for both the 800 and the 15. So they're going to be able to kick and hit a high level of speed after anywhere from a minute and a half to 3 minutes of racing.
Yeah. Just locking in the rhythm, kind of reading the field, what's happening. And at some point, you have to make a move.
Yeah. So we've discussed this idea and we haven't actually done anything yet, but it's an interesting idea of what if we do something that's inherently rhythmical, but yet still explosive and coordinated to help develop that quality of expressing high levels of force and speed under some fatigue. So it's an interesting idea to bring in of, yeah, it's not just, it's not the curtain jerker of the workout. It's not the first thing you do. It can be integrated elsewhere. It's not just, okay, we're gonna warm up, we're gonna Olympic lift, and then do the rest of the workout. It can be spaced throughout a little bit more creatively as well.
Yeah. And that's where I haven't had, like I said, I've had the thought, I haven't had the confidence to like pull trigger on going, you know what? I'm putting a clean or a snatch in this complex. And we tried some wacky stuff. We had a triplet where the middle exercise was straight leg bounds, and we did 30 or 40 meters of straight leg bound down the middle of the weight room because we have racks on either side. So
Mm,
I made a cone pathway, which is like, do not cross the cone. This is like a road, do not cross. And, we did a heavier strength movement based at the hip in the racks, and then they would come out and they would do the straight leg bound after that. And this was actually on sessions where we came from our speed endurance work.
mm,
So like you said, there's an element of fatigue present from the track session we had where we're tapping into
yeah.
high speed, high velocity movements for a longer duration. Not quite the same that you're talking about because I work with athletes that run shorter distance, but then we pair it with some of that stuff. And like I said, but in that session, it was like, okay, let's come in, do snatch. And then once you're done snatch, okay, we'll get into this heavy strength movement paired with the straight leg bound. I haven't, like I said, had the confidence or the guts to just be like, you know what, let's do this really wacky and different and find a place for weightlifting in that complex. But I'm enjoying this discussion because it's different than just the positives and the negatives of, or like the what does weightlifting give you, what does it doesn't give you, because this is a perhaps a unique way that we can use it. And this is something I've never really
Yeah.
talked about until recently. So if you had presented this idea to me 2 years ago when I recorded the original version, I'd sit there and be like, are you like, what's wrong with you? Like,
He's gone
why
off the
would you do?
rails.
Yeah, why would you do this? Like, you're like, yeah. But now it's interesting because yeah, when you think about weightlifting as a coordination tool, it's like, okay, maybe I can, you know, put it in somewhere different. The challenge I would have is that every time the athletes touch the bar for weightlifting that I work with, they they just want to rip the heaviest weight off the floor.
Yeah,
And I think in this case, it would require a little more discipline and control in terms of like I need there's limits I got to play within, but I got to
yeah.
do it really well. But I am curious to maybe try it. Now is not the right time within the cycle we're in, but I'm tempted to again and to break up the monotony of
Yeah.
we come in, we weight lift, we do whatever. Now it's like you said, it's woven into a different part of the session, and I think this could be a really unique way to use weightlifting for athletes,
Yeah.
athletes in other sports. I don't know if I would, have my weightlifters straight leg bounding and doing split snatch. Like that's probably not great for them for their sport. But for athletes that are using it as a training tool, why not? I think this is a great idea.
Well, and that's the thing with weightlifting. There's so many different derivatives. With the trap bar jump, there's only so many ways you can spice up a trap bar jump, for example. Weightlifting with all the different derivatives and depending on how creative you want to get. And you've already mentioned split snatch and some of those things and blocks and hang and whatever it is. Like
Yeah.
it is a very fun tool to use.
The good morning jump is a fan favorite too. Every time you give that to
Yeah.
somebody, they're like, "Oh, I've never done this before. This is cool, whatever." And it's like, "Okay, yeah, here you go."
Yeah. Good morning jumps are always good. That's the thing is SNC is just movement, just loaded movement. That's all it is. Right. And I think, and you talked about it like, oh, like what are the cons? What are the pros of doing weightlifting? And I think that is something that's super inherently S&C.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's just because a lot of the stuff around S&C is typically hard science, research, quantitative. Oh, it's
it
good at
is or it
this. It
isn't.
developed this. It's very X, Y, Z, very black, white, very this or them, very dichotomized. And it's just movement. You're just jumping with a heavy object. At the end of the day, that's really all it is. And there's levels of skill and development and intent that comes with that. And I think oftentimes, like you said, people just get too caught up in the, oh, I can't do weightlifting because it doesn't do this. And they forget all the different layers to it, right? It's saying, why would I teach a basketball player to sprint at max velocity over 40 meters? The court's only 20 meters long. They don't get to sprint over 40. But there's knock-on
Yeah.
effects and coordination benefits and rhythm benefits and just overall structural adaptation benefits from overloading max velocity in someone who's never going to run that fast.
Yeah, and so one of the other interesting points that kind of comes up where like when I talked about some of the downsides or some of the considerations I take into account with weightlifting, because as much as it is a catch-all
Mhm.
exercise to some extent, there are components of training that are not present
Yes.
in your weightlifting movements. And I think one of the biggest things I talked about is that if you look at traditional or a typical program, weightlifting's in there, like you said, from a power rate of force development perspective. And then someone goes, okay, that checks the box for that type of stuff.
Mhm.
And then we get into our strength work and then accessories and we're done. But when you look at the requirements of rate of force development and power in a sporting context, it's a much more reactive movement. The time frame you have to apply force is way smaller. The coordination of timing, changing direction, sprinting forward, jumping, and then sprinting, or whatever the combination of movements happens to be. Weightlifting doesn't have that reactive
Mhm.
component. But like you said, it does have a very beneficial kind of longer window rate of force development. If you think about the pull from the knee to the hip, it is a longer duration, high force application activity. When you start combining it, or the idea of combining it with, okay, I'm going to do weightlifting, a weightlifting derivative, and then straight leg bounds, or weightlifting derivative and a rapid med ball throw, or weightlifting derivative and skip for height, skip for distance, something like that. You're now working the reactive element into that, call it the series or the complex that you're
Mhm.
doing. And now you're kind of checking, at least for me, one of the biggest boxes of the, okay, great, we did weightlifting, but what about my reactive element or my
Yeah.
plyometric element where we use the stretch shortening cycle, not in a double knee bend kind of way when we drive the bar up, but in a stretch shortening cycle way where there's interaction with the ground, a
Mhm.
bound rebound type activity. I go, okay, now that kind of checks the box where it's like, yeah, pair the weightlifting movement with that, and now you've done those things. So again, that's why I really like that you've brought up that kind of component of it, because that is probably one of the biggest elements that goes through my mind of should I use it or not. Apart from the very
Mhm.
basic, does the athlete have the basic training age and tools available to, in terms of movement quality and
Yeah.
squat hinge, things like that, the mobility to reasonably do it. Do we have the tools available? Again, I've worked in weight rooms without barbells. So,
Mhm.
and I'm not about to kettlebell clean and kettlebell snatch people. That's, I just don't think it's worth it. Um, so if those things are in play, I'm going, okay, does it satisfy some of the reactive element? How reactive does this athlete need to be in their sport? And if I do weightlifting, can I still address that quality? So that's why I really like these ideas that you're bringing to the table. And I'm glad to hear that you've actually tried it, because,
Yeah.
now it gives me a little more confidence to go, okay, you know what, if maybe I can try it. And I can be like, well, other people in the country and our sport are doing it too. So, you know, we got to keep up with everybody.
Well, again, like it's a way to, again, like you said, especially in track and field, and weightlifting is another example. Like the sport can get really freaking boring.
It's the same
Clean
thing
and
over
jerk
and
and
over.
snatch gets really boring after a while, and that's why you see that's what invigorates a lot of these tools of derivatives in weightlifting. A lot of it comes from, okay, we need to create constraints to improve X technical metric, but a lot of it's just like, holy shit, like snatch
It's the
again.
same thing over and
It's
over.
been, what is it, like The Office, where it's like we got 31 days of nonsense, like 31 days of snatch in a row. Like, okay, here we go.
And you know what? It has to be that way.
Yeah,
Like you're
so
not
you
going to
get
be
the
great
core.
at weightlifting if you don't weightlift. You can't just decide, you know what, I'm going to go do something else for 3 months and then come back to weightlifting, because all the
Yep.
other people in your sport who were weightlifting for 3 months are going to be a hell of a lot better at clean and jerk and snatch than you are, and now you're behind. And it's no
Yeah.
different in track. Like
Oh no.
it's boring, but we kind of have to get that stuff done. So the more variety and spice we can bring into it, probably the better off we are.
Yeah, especially in physiologically driven sports, right?
Yes.
Track and field, weightlifting,
Yes.
powerlifting, swimming. Sports are just inherently kind of boring and stagnant. Basketball and rugby and volleyball, like those sports have the novelty of the sport itself and the different drills you're doing on the court. Like the sports are
Yeah, and
inherently very variable and very constantly changing, and classically call it fun in that
yeah,
sense.
there's an unpredictable element of what is my opponent going to do. There's you never know what's coming next. It's always fresh and new.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the big piece. That's if you can mix up the same tools in a slightly different way to induce novelty, I think it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, no, that's and now my brain is swirling with all kinds of ideas of, you know, different different movements that you can pair with the weightlifting. And yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. Yeah, there's a lot a lot of ideas I have. This is going to be an episode down the road, maybe talking about complexes and pairing things and whatever. But that's a good, yeah. Like I've never really considered pairing it with anything, and this is a unique point.
Well, again, it comes back to that conversation of, again, classically, what would you see? If we're going to pair anything, heavy lift, some dynamic, take advantage of PAP or some of those components. But there are pieces coming out of like PAP with Olympic lifting and what's sort of the threshold, or PAP from plyometric work. Like it's all the same thing at the end of the day, right? If I do a heavy clean, the stimulus on the nervous system is quite similar to a heavy squat,
It's
especially in an
still heavy
athlete.
movement. Yeah,
In a non-strength sport population, it's very similar.
yeah. I mean, if anything, it could be like higher than usual because it's the unique demand of heavy load at speeds they normally don't move that load.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, I'm moving the squat. It's really heavy, but it's slow.
Yeah.
It's not moving very quick. Or, oh, this med ball, I'm rifling it at a very fast speed, but then you get it clean, you know, you're probably moving that bar at the same speed you would a trap bar jump with 25 or 30% of the weight that's on the bar. So now you have all this load and this speed, and it's the combination of the two that, yeah, like you said, probably gives you a bigger stimulus for non-strength sport athletes than you would normally get. Yeah, my brain's all over that. I'm distracted now thinking about like all the different like combinations of things you could do and how you could go about pairing some of those things.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? It's one of those things again, and I feel like this conversation has been very pro weightlifting. We've gone very heavy down the this is why we use weightlifting, this is how we're going to use it. There's definitely realms where you don't use it, right?
Oh,
And we've had this
absolutely.
conversation lots. Someone's super
Yep.
uncoordinated. Again, so I use the example of curlers in mine. I had a couple curlers who had done cleans before and I really liked them.
So you throw them in.
Typically, I don't touch cleans with curlers. It's not
Not
a
worth
great
it.
combination, but they're not the most. Oftentimes, they come from one of two sects where they curled and did a dozen other sports and they're super coordinated, athletic, and very robust individuals, or all they've done is curl their entire lives.
Yeah.
And for me, my time is better spent doing other movements and coordinative abilities that are maybe a little bit more closely tied to their sport. I'm trying to connect those dots now, and that can be on the back shelf
Yeah.
while we focus on this stuff, right? Same thing. I know swimmers is another group I'm
Oh,
not
I was
typically
just about to
fond
bring
of.
up swimming. I feel like
Yeah.
that's a population you do not want to touch with those movements. Typically.
When it's
Not
when
not
it's
never, but typically.
when it's tough because you look at butterfly, for example. If I'm going to look at an event where I want to do a snatch with, biomechanically speaking, for the butterfly, I'm like, oh, that's great. The arm
Perfect.
position's relatively similar. It's the
Yeah.
reverse direction of what they're
I was
doing
gonna say it's
in
the
the
reverse
sport.
action, so you can like load up and then big power
Yeah.
back into the pool.
Yeah, there's some shoulder health stuff of okay, let's do a very similar motion in the reverse direction, like some of those conversations you can have. But again, similar to the curling example, of a lot of swimmers have only swam for a really long time. So unless they've got a really robust sense of rate of force development and coordination and skill, I
And
might
even the
not
way
want to
they
dabble
interact,
into
they're in
that.
water all the time. They
Oh yeah,
interact with gravity different than like land-based athletes. So
yeah,
now all of a sudden you're getting them to throw this bar overhead, which could be heavy, and then they're not used to dealing with gravity in a like in a sporting context. They're not used to dealing with gravity in that way because they're in the
no,
water all the time. It's like you who knows what you're getting.
yeah. So that would be a situation where I would use that kind of movement with the vast minority of swimmers who would walk in my door. The ones who
Yep.
come in where I'm looking at you going, you've done a lot of different stuff than just swim.
Yep.
You've played
You're probably
basketball
good
and
to go.
volleyball and done all these other things or rugby or whatever. Like you've got a really broad skill set to work with. We can do some of these more advanced movements for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, we focused a lot on the positive. There are some drawbacks
Yeah.
to weightlifting, and like I said, one of the big ones for me is that lack of reactivity.
Yeah.
You don't really interact with the ground. There's not a bound rebound action in terms of interacting with the ground. There is a propel, move the bar upward, decelerate, get under the bar, absorb
Yeah.
force element, but there is not a I'm airborne, I contact the ground, and then I have to propel myself in a different direction, which is, present in a wide range of sports. Um, but again, I don't think I think I've gotten to the mindset now where, like you said, it's not, is weightlifting good or bad? Is it something I'm, for or against? It's a tool that is in the toolbox that I look at the situation, I look at the athlete, I look at the sport, I look at their, all the different variables that are at play, and I go, is this a tool that I want to take out of the toolbox and use? Do I think I'm going to get benefit from it? And that's kind of, I think, shifted my focus away from at one point I was anti weightlifting, then I was pro weightlifting, and then I was like somewhere in the middle, and now I'm like, man, it's just a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And sometimes I take it out and sometimes I don't, depending if I think the job requires it or not.
Yeah. And that's the thing is all the research and these conversations come around of again, bigger, faster, stronger. It's a rate of force development tool. And the research is going to look at what develops the most rate of force development on force plates between the trap bar jump and the Olympic lift and the high pull and whatever. And that's what creates these conversations are like, oh, the high pull is better than the clean because the rate of force development from this study is higher. It's like the conversation is so much deeper than that level, right? Like you said, it's a movement tool. And like underlying movement is Olympic lifting is a movement. It involves lots of different qualities, coordinatively and physiologically. You just gotta know when to use the tool.
Yeah, and there's not really, like you said, there's not really much else like to think about as far if you're just thinking about it in terms of I'm doing it because of A or not doing it because of B. Like you said, you've maybe lost the plot in terms of like what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish. And I don't know, at least for me, the big game changer was understanding weightlifting the sport. That
Yeah,
gave me such a greater context of just just everything. And again, not just copy paste, oh, weightlifters are powerful. We'll do weightlifting because they're powerful. I want to be powerful. Done.
yeah.
You know, oh, that's a different I'm going to pull off the blocks because it's different. Or I'm going to pull from the floor because it's different than the hang or whatever. It's you start to dive into the sport of, well, why would I do a hang clean? Why would I pull off the blocks? Because the reasons will be different. I mean, why are you pulling off the floor? Well, you're pulling off the floor because that's where you have to for the sport. So at some
Yeah.
point you have to do that. But all, like you said, all the different tools, all the different derivatives, they're being used for a reason. And I think when you have a better understanding of why do weightlifters do what they do because of their sport, it opens the door for you to have a better understanding of it as a tool in the toolbox, not just a, like you said, a default. I need to check the speed, power, rate of force development box, weightlifting, done.
Yeah.
And then all my athletes will be fast, they'll be powerful. Well, maybe not. If that's the only thing you're doing, they might not, you might not be satisfying the power, rate of force development, and speed demands that the athletes that you work with are, challenged with. So, I mean, again, for anyone listening, if you're on the fence about weightlifting or you're one side or the other, like do yourself a favor and dive into the sport.
And
You
that's
don't
just an
actually have to
incredible.
coach it, but like read about it, understand it. Like that I think helps.
Well, and for me, like from that point that you put on, having been the guy who went and lived the weightlifting life for 6 months, I went and coached and worked exclusively at a weightlifting club in the States for 6 months. It's incredibly valuable. And that applies to any other skill. If I want to get better at doing sprint training for rugby or football or soccer or basketball, whatever it is, if you want to be a better S&C coach and develop speed in your athletes, go hang out with track coaches. Like, go hang out with good track coaches and figure out what drills they're doing and in what context those drills apply, what skills those drills develop that connect back into the sport of running. It's the same thing, right? The biggest thing you can learn about a tool or a sport or a modality is go spend time there, right? And you will get way more out of it than just reading on it or watching videos on YouTube or listening to podcasts with you and I talking about it.
Yeah. But it's a good place to start where it's like, yeah, just
Absolutely.
dive into the sport. And like you said, you don't have to live it. I think part of the
No.
reason is we like realistically, we probably didn't have the time to like as I was diving into the world of track and field, you were out there diving into the world of weightlifting.
Yeah.
And there were other people I knew that might be diving into the world of strongman and other people that were diving into power. Like I can't just change careers I'm a track
No.
coach for 3 months and now I'm a strongman coach for 3 months and now I'm a powerlifting coach for 3 months and I'm a swim coach. Like you're not going to get anywhere. But yeah, like you said, you can maybe dabble into, something briefly, especially if it really relates to, what you're doing in your sport. And then again, that's what the others are there for. You can learn from them, go watch, go observe, do whatever. You don't have to become a weightlifting coach to get a better appreciation and understanding of weightlifting. But you have to spend some amount of time around the sport and the people. And I mean, even when we went to you coached James in that weightlifting meet
Yeah.
at Saville. I had never been to a weightlifting competition before. And so
Oh, that was your
even
first time.
just that was my first and only weightlifting competition I've been to. Actually, no, that's not true because I worked the desk the one day when there was another weightlifting competition.
Oh
So I
yeah.
had to sit through that. I didn't know anyone competing in it. So I've seen two competitions, but I closely paid attention to one because you
Yeah.
were coaching James in that. And there's even things where like there's things that happen within the order in which people go and how to select the weight, and there's strategy, and like any other sport, there's a rhyme or reason to how you're getting from the start to the end of the event. And there were some things that came up where I'm like, oh, okay, this is why they do that, because yeah, you might get 5 minutes between a lift, you might get 1 minute between a lift.
Oh yeah.
Like you don't know what's going on. So yeah, okay, we you sit there and go, well, why would you give somebody 1 minute rest between, whatever? It's a high output activity. But yeah, if they attempt whatever weight and fail, and they're the next ones up, well, you get, what is it, 1 or 2 minutes, and then you're right back up there, and you got to go again.
Depending on what happens, might have to take 99% of your max with a 1 minute rest.
Exactly, and that's something I never knew of, so I would never think to, yeah, I'd be like, oh, that would be dumb to program something like that. But then you're going, okay, well, wait, if weightlifters can do that because of the sport demands, well, okay, I might need to, like you said, come out hard in a middle distance race and then settle in, and then I got to turn it up again. So maybe doing heavy cleans with a minute or two between wouldn't be the end of the world.
Yeah.
Or even, hey, pull a heavy clean, do some longer duration, high velocity activity, come back and pull a heavy clean again, complex over. Um, like again, I don't exactly know where that would fit, but for example, you off the top of your head, you would go, that's a really dumb idea. But then if you start to look at the nuances of the sports and how they work, but if you don't see it and don't experience it, you don't really know that.
Yeah.
So for me, those were all game changing things for me. Where now, again, if I didn't do those things, I would never have viewed weightlifting as a tool. I probably would still be anti weightlifting,
Yeah.
realistically speaking.
Yeah. Weightlifting competitions are like golf. The appreciation, the coolest part of golf you never see because you always see him hit the ball, but you miss the conversation with the caddy and the walk down the grass where Tiger Woods is scoping out what's going on and looking at the wind and looking at the roll of the grass and having this conversation like, ooh, like what I was gonna say, what stick should we use? What club should we use
Let's
to
see, what
hit the
golf
ball? And
stick
you can
should we
tell
take
I
out
am
of the
very
bag?
seasoned in golf.
Yeah, I'm not a big
Um,
golf guy either.
yeah, and like how much angle should they hit on it? 'Cause how much is the wind gonna take? How much is the roll on the green gonna roll? Like that's the stuff you don't see. Like weightlifting is kind of boring to watch because you see a guy walk up, hit a weight, walk away. You
Man,
miss all
legit,
the
all I've
backroom
seen is like when they're
conversation.
like so and so broke a world record, and then you watch legitimately the 4 seconds it takes them to pull the bar off the floor, toss it overhead, and then they smile, presumably when the white lights or the white flags go up, and they go, I can put this down. I just broke a world record. And then you never see weightlifting ever again.
Yeah,
You don't know before, after, anything like that. So, I mean, I think to me, that's one of the biggest kind of things, like just anyone listening, if you haven't dove into the world of weightlifting and you are a strength coach, you train people, you use, if you even have thought about using weightlifting in any capacity for training, I think you have to do that.
it's doing justice to the modality, and again, it's doing your due diligence as a practitioner of understanding what you are doing to a very good capacity. And you don't, again, like you said, you don't have to be a specialist in it, but you should be enough of a generalist in any topic you are using or actively pursuing that you can understand and be able to explain it. If you don't have a general skill and knowledge around the event, like you're probably not using it as effectively as you should or not as responsible as you should. And yes, you're going to have your two or three things that you'll be the specialist in that people will come talk to you about, but you should have general knowledge around everything else.
Yeah, and that's where I like to think. Obviously, I still have a lot to learn about weightlifting, and I still try to explore it as much as I can. But I'm definitely better off than I was 4 or 5 years ago as a track and field coach or strength coach. I still consider myself more of a strength coach than a track coach, even though I'm out there coaching it every day. Um, but I think I could sit down in a room with weightlifting coaches. And I'm not going to blow anyone's mind, but I can go along with the conversation.
Oh yeah.
And I'd be like, "Oh, I understand why you're saying this," or I get the perspective of that because I've taken the time to dive into it. I still want to learn more. I'm always going to learn more, But if you had dropped me in that room 5 years ago, I'd be like, huh? What's going on? Sorry, you would do what? That's really dumb. With not knowing any of the context or any of the background as to why that would be smart or not.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, do you have any? I mean, you're the weightlifting guy. You're the resident weightlifting guy on the show. I mean, there must be like, are there resources? Are there like, because I think, like you said, people should, if you're using it as a training tool, respect the sport,
Yeah.
understand it, do your due diligence. Like, where should people start if, you're Tommy 5 or 6 years ago, anti-weightlifter, you know, where do you tell me to go start reading or exploring?
Yeah, there's especially now, there's a ton of stuff to go check out. Oh, a couple books are always a really good example. So we talked about Danny Camargo's book
Such a
of
good
our own
book.
coaches in queuing. Super simple, easy read around the basics of what the derivatives do and what you want to see. Um, Amy and Greg Everett are phenomenal. So on their website, Catalyst Athletics, they've got a ton of different programs, a ton of different articles. They've written some books themselves. They're awesome to follow on social media. They do a fair amount. I don't have to do as much on Instagram, but YouTube, Greg puts out quite a lot of stuff around different things. So they're great to get some basic stuff from an easy, digestible. Here's a quick 1 minute video about this derivative movement. Um, oh gosh, there's a coach. His name's Brandon in Australia. He's written a book that's really, really
Oh,
interesting. I'm blanking on his last name,
Acardi or something.
something like that.
Yeah,
I can't
I know
remember.
I know who you're talking about.
His Instagram is awesome. I feel like we need to like post it to the Speed Strength Instagram when we post a clip of this or something because he's got some awesome stuff that I've
Yeah,
started following a little bit more because I never heard of him until a couple months ago. I've started following him and he posts some awesome stuff about weightlifting out there again, explaining derivatives of why you do something or here's some technical cues around this error. He's fantastic. And I haven't read his book. I'm sure it's probably really good. And then if you're just looking to watch weightlifting and get explanations and stuff and just see what it's like out there, Weightlifting House is an awesome place. If you want more of a weightlifter's perspective on it, go check out Weightlifting House on YouTube. They post lots of videos of just people lifting or actually talking about why they do stuff and breaking down drills and lifts and things like that. They're fantastic.
yeah. Like I said, I think it's just good for. I think the easiest way to get the information out there to people and
Yep.
encourage them to kind of go after it is like, okay, here's something to get you started, and then that'll send you down whatever rabbit hole you decide to go down yourself with what piques your interest and stuff like that. But yeah, those are all I think good places to start, and some of them I haven't even heard of, so it gives me something to go. That's why I figured I knew there was going to be something where I'm like, I haven't heard of this or I haven't read that book. That's the next thing I can toss on my weightlifting to do list in terms of whatever's out there. So yeah, man, a lot of really good ideas. A lot of I liked where the convo kind of went. I
Oh,
think
absolutely.
different stuff that I've never talked about, never really had the conversation with people period about. So I think there's some. I'm at least walking out of here going, okay, I have some interesting ideas of how I might you know do some of these things and maybe use weightlifting a bit differently to break up the monotony of day to day training
Yeah.
that we get in a very monotonous sport.
Got to make it somewhat fun.
Exactly.
But speaking of things that pair well with weightlifting, Tommy, I think music might be one of those things.
Man, I got something for you. I got some good stuff for you this week. So, in the interest of, by the way, playlists were very good. I was
You like them,
impressed.
eh?
I liked it. I figured I would. Um, but in the interest of this turning into a EDM only music share session, I had to go, a bit of a different direction. Uh, there is a band I think you've heard of. They're well known. Um, they are very heavy. They are very dark. They may or may not go by the name of Slayer, who I know we've had enough jokes in the weight room of the guy yelling Slayer. So I got some Slayer stuff for you this week.
Oh, let's go.
Okay, it's not just Slayer though. I forget the name of the channel, but there's a guy on YouTube, a music producer, who mashes up either the lyrics of Slayer to another song, or he takes the riffs and the music of Slayer and layers other lyrics on top of it.
Oh,
And he's got some awesome combos of, the song "Walking on Sunshine." I
yeah,
forget
yeah,
who
yeah.
sings it.
He
Yeah,
layers it with
so
Slayer.
they layer the "Walking on Sunshine" lyrics and mash it up with "Chemical Warfare" by Slayer, and it works. They pair, um, is his name Edwin Starr? The War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing.
Oh gosh,
I
I have
think I
no idea,
think
but I know who you're talking about.
I think that's who it is. They pair that up with, um, oh, I forget the Slayer song. This is not good on me. I forget the Slayer song they paired it up with. But the mashups are incredible. And some of them you like, how are they gonna pair this together? It's so good. So if you search up like Slayer, music match, I'll send you the stuff, but
Yeah,
I figure you'll like it. And it's Slayer, which, like I said, there's a little bit of the background jokes and you know, how many times in that weight room did we just yell across the room, Slayer? So I
I love that,
figured
man. I'm
that
gonna have to
was
go
a
check it out. I'm very intrigued how they make Slayer
yeah,
work with Walking on
yeah,
Sunshine.
yeah, it's a good one. So that's what I got for you this week. In the interest
I
of
like it.
getting
You
avoiding the EDM trap.
well, you're gonna be impressed because I am also not feeding this EDM trap that you and I are gonna have. I
Here
This
we
is a
go.
curveball. I know you're gonna be surprised. So we've been listening to it's an Italian rock band. They won Eurovision, I think 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
So they're kind of a big deal. They're not heavy. They're not nearly as heavy as Slayer. Like you would probably call it more of like a pop rock
Okay. Yeah.
type
But I
thing.
mean, my gauge of pop rock is different than most people, and I
I know
I understand that.
Slayer's tame on your standards, so I'm not worried about that. But they just came out with a new album a couple weeks ago, and it's a very diverse album. So they've got Tom Morello on one of their songs.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah. So some of their stuff is like very soft, very slow, but also quite some heavy. And probably about a quarter of their songs are actually done in Italian still.
Oh, I like when they do that. I like when not everything's in English. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So it's getting less and less, but like their old albums were almost exclusively Italian with a couple English songs that had horrible English, terrible English.
Just
And you can tell they've taken some English lessons because it's actually really good now in English.
okay.
But they're doing a world
uh,
tour and they released this new album. So the band's name's Monoskin.
Monoskin.
Monoskin. And they've done some covers
Okay.
of like killer songs. They did Begging by Madcon cover.
Okay. I'll check them out.
They did
That
some awesome covers, but the original, it's called Rush, is their new album. Awesome group. Very rarely have I listened to a new album or 11 of 12 songs I really enjoy.
yeah, that's rare.
And this is one of them. There's like one or two songs I'm like about. Everything else is wicked. So definitely
Yo,
go check out a new Italian rock band for you there, Tommy.
done deal. Done deal. I like that one. I'm all over that. And we both avoided the EDM trap. Now watch next time we're gonna come back and last time I didn't do EDM, so here you go.
I'm giving the listeners a false sense of security because from now on out, it's probably going to be EDM until like next December.
Yeah, you've bought yourself 5 straight months of EDM suggestions now. Because
Yeah,
you'd be like, remember that one time I suggested the Italian rock band? See?
not only EDM.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not a one-trick pony. Get out of here. So yeah, I mean that's a wrap, I think. I had a lot of fun. A lot of good
Yeah.
a lot of good info there. Um I think also we should probably where can people find you? Um I think most people know by now you can find me at Speed Strength Performance on Instagram or just listen to any episodes on the of the podcast. Things I say are there. What about you, Christian? Where do we find you?
Yeah. If you want to find my almost non existent social media footprint, it's Coach Proofer, Prufer, on Instagram.
And we'll
So
be tagging each other and stuff.
yeah,
So if you follow one of the two of us, you'll be able to find the other probably pretty easily. So yeah, I mean that was a good one today. I had a lot of fun, a lot of things to absorb, a lot of things to kind of consider. probably some things to try, and then come back later on and you know see where we're at with some of this stuff. So
I feel like we have to have an episode now on contrast complex organization and creation now at this point. Like this is we're
add
creating
it to
some
the
rabbit
list.
holes here, which I'm enjoying.
Exactly. Yeah, that's I'll put on the list as soon as I stop the recording. So
Yeah.
so yeah. I mean, thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to everyone for viewing, depending on how you watch or listen to the podcast. Always appreciate you coming along, and yeah, we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks, Tommy.